The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago. He sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at the same blank screen that had mocked him for the past 5 days. No calls.
No texts. No explanation.
His wife had simply vanished into thin air on a Tuesday morning, leaving behind nothing but questions and a half-empty closet. The first day, he'd been worried. Frantic. Even. He'd called her office, only to discover she'd taken sudden leave. Her best friend claimed ignorance. Her parents hadn't heard from her either, though her mother's tone suggested she knew more than she was willing to share. By the second day, he'd filed a missing person report, pacing the police station like a caged animal while an indifferent officer took notes with maddening slowness. "Most adults turn up on their own, sir," the officer had said, not even bothering to look up from his paperwork. "Especially when some of their belongings are missing." That detail had struck him like a physical blow. It wasn't a kidnapping. It wasn't an accident. She had chosen to leave. Chosen not to tell him. Chosen to let him suffer in ignorance while she did. What? Went where? The third day brought a different kind of pain. The worry began to curdle into something darker. He'd taken the day off work, unable to focus, unable to function. He'd walked through their home like a ghost, seeing their life together through new eyes. The photos on the wall suddenly felt like lies. The wedding album in the study mocked him with its promises of forever. He'd opened her remaining drawers, looking for clues, and found only the mundane remnants of a shared life that now felt like a cruel joke. By the fourth day, the pain had crystallized into clarity. He sat in his office, door closed, and made a call to his lawyer friend, David. They'd known each other since college, and David had handled his business contracts for years. Now, he needed a different kind of help. "I need to know my options," he'd said quietly into the phone. David had been silent for a long moment. "You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The fifth day had been spent in action. He'd documented everything meticulously: the missing clothes, the empty bank account she'd drained by half, the lack of communication. He'd changed the locks on their home, boxed up her remaining belongings with mechanical precision, and stacked them neatly in the garage. He'd transferred utilities into his name alone, updated his emergency contacts, and removed her access to his accounts. Each action had felt both liberating and devastating, like amputating a diseased limb to save the body. His lawyer had worked quickly, filing paperwork for abandonment. In their state, 5 days of unexplained absence with clear intent to leave, evidenced by the withdrawn money and packed bags, was enough to start proceedings. It wasn't finalized yet, but the wheels were in motion. Now, on the evening of the fifth day, he sat in the gathering darkness of his kitchen, and felt surprisingly calm. The grief had burned through him like wildfire, leaving behind something harder and clearer. He'd loved her. God, how he'd loved her. But love without respect, without basic consideration, without even the courtesy of honesty, wasn't love at all. It was just a pretty word for something toxic. The sound of a key in the lock made him sit up straight. The key turned once, twice, then rattled uselessly. He heard her muffled curse from the other side of the door. Then came the knock, imperious and impatient. He stood slowly, picked up the envelope he prepared, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, he could see her, perfectly made up, designer bag on her shoulder, looking annoyed rather than apologetic. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for what came next. This was going to change everything. But then again, she'd already done that 5 days ago. Now it was his turn. He opened the door slowly, deliberately. She stood there in the porch light, looking exactly as she had 5 days ago, but somehow completely different to him now. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup impeccable, her designer jeans and cashmere sweater screaming casual wealth. She looked like she'd just returned from a spa retreat, not from abandoning her husband without a word. "The lock doesn't work," she said, not even a hello, as if this were his fault. Her tone carried that particular edge of irritation he'd grown too familiar with over the past year. "Did you break it?" "I changed it," he replied evenly, his hand still on the door, his body blocking the entrance. She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes, and held out her hand. "Well, give me the new key then." "I'm exhausted." He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered how he'd missed so many signs. The entitlement. The casual cruelty. The way she'd slowly eroded his boundaries until he'd become someone he barely recognized. Someone who waited by the phone like a desperate fool while she lived her life without a second thought for his feelings. Hello. She waved her hand in front of his face. Are you going to let me in, or are we going to stand here all night? I need to shower and change. I have brunch plans tomorrow. Brunch plans. She'd been gone for 5 days, and she had brunch plans. Where were you? He asked quietly. She sighed dramatically, shifting her bag to her other shoulder. Does it matter? I'm back now. You should be grateful I came back at all. Jennifer told me I should just stay gone, that you'd be fine eventually. But I decided to give you another chance. The words hung in the air between them like poison. She was giving him another chance. As if he were the one who'd done something wrong. As if she were bestowing some great favor by returning to the home they'd built together, the life they'd promised to share. Something must have shown on his face because her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. What? She demanded. Why are you looking at me like that? He held out the envelope he'd been holding. Your things are in the garage. The access code is in here, along with some other documents you'll need to review. She stared at the envelope like it was a snake. What are you talking about? My things are in the house. Our house. No, he said simply. Not anymore. She laughed then, a sharp, disbelieving sound. You're being ridiculous. We had a fight, I needed space, now I'm back. Stop being so dramatic and let me in. We didn't have a fight, he corrected, his voice still calm, still steady, though his heart was pounding. You left. No note, no call, no explanation. You emptied half our savings account and disappeared for 5 days while I filed a missing person report and worried you were dead in a ditch somewhere. Oh, please. She waved her hand dismissively. You're such a worrier. I'm a grown woman. I don't need to report my every move to you like you're my father. No, he agreed. But you did need to tell your husband that you were leaving. You did need to answer at least one of the 47 calls I made. You did need to show some basic consideration for the person you married. Her eyes narrowed. So what? You're punishing me now. Very mature. How long are you going to keep this up? An hour. A day. Until I apologize prettily enough for your wounded ego. He held the envelope out further. I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. Take it. She snatched it from his hand, tearing it open with perfectly manicured nails. He watched her face as she read, watched the dismissive smirk fade, watched the color drain, watched the reality sink in. The lock change notification. The abandonment filing. The lawyer's contact information. The itemized list of her belongings currently in storage in the garage. You can't be serious, she whispered, looking up at him with wide eyes. You can't do this. I already did. We're married. Her voice rose, panic creeping in now. You can't just kick me out of my own home. You left, he said quietly. You chose to go. I'm just making that choice permanent. She stood there, papers trembling in her hands, her face cycling through expressions so quickly he could barely track them. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like fear. The porch light cast harsh shadows across her features, making her look older, more vulnerable than he'd seen her in years. This is insane, she said, her voice shaking now. You're being completely insane. I need to come inside so we can talk about this like adults. No. The single word hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. What do you mean, no? We need to discuss this. You can't just end a marriage because I took a few days for myself. You didn't take a few days for yourself, he said, and despite his efforts to stay calm, some of the pain leaked through. You vanished. You let me think something terrible had happened to you. You let me call hospitals and police stations. You let me sit here every night wondering if I'd ever see you again, wondering what I'd done wrong, tearing myself apart trying to understand. I didn't ask you to do that, she shot back, recovering some of her earlier defiance. That's your issue, not mine. I'm not responsible for your anxiety. He almost laughed at the audacity of it. No, but you are responsible for basic human decency. For picking up the phone once in 5 days. For sending a single text that said, I'm alive. That's not anxiety. That's the bare minimum of respect that any person deserves, let alone your spouse. She shook her head rapidly, her styled hair falling across her face. This is about her, isn't it? Jennifer told me you'd been calling her, interrogating her like some jealous. This has nothing to do with Jennifer or anyone else, he interrupted. This is about you and me. About the fact that when I needed you to show up for our marriage, you checked out. And when you came back, you didn't come back with an apology or an explanation. You came back with attitude and demands. So that's it. Her voice cracked. One mistake and you're just done? What about for better or worse? What about till death do us part? What about it? He met her eyes steadily. You broke those vows the moment you walked out that door. I'm just acknowledging what you already decided. She was crying now, mascara starting to run in dark tracks down her cheeks. He'd seen her cry before, but always with purpose, to win arguments, to avoid consequences, to manipulate situations in her favor. These tears looked different, messier, more real. But he'd learned to be wary of her emotions. They'd been used as weapons too many times before. Please, she whispered. Can I just come in and we can talk? Really talk? I'll explain everything. I'll make you understand. For a moment, just a moment, he wavered. 7 years of marriage, of history, of memories both good and bad, pressed against his resolve like a physical weight. He remembered the woman he'd married, the one who'd laughed at his jokes and dreamed with him about their future. But that woman had been gone for a long time, replaced gradually by someone he barely recognized. This disappearance wasn't the problem. It was just the final symptom of a disease that had been killing their marriage for years. Where were you? He asked again, quieter this time. She looked away, wiping at her face. Does it really matter now? Yes. A long silence stretched between them. From somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car passed, its headlights sweeping across them briefly before disappearing into the night. I was with friends, she finally said. At a beach house. Jennifer's family's place. We were. I needed time to think. About us. About everything. She looked back at him, her eyes red and pleading. About whether I wanted to stay married, whether this was the life I wanted, whether. She trailed off. Whether I was what you wanted, he finished for her. She didn't deny it. I came back, didn't I? I chose to come back. You came back expecting me to be here waiting. Grateful. Compliant. Ready to accept whatever scraps of commitment you were willing to offer. He shook his head slowly. But I'm not that person anymore. The man who would have accepted that. He died sometime around day 3 of your disappearance. So what? You've moved on already. There was bitterness in her voice now, mixed with the tears. 5 days and you've just completely written off 7 years. I've had a lot of time to think too, he said. About the past year especially. About how many times you've dismissed my feelings. How many arguments ended with me apologizing for your behavior. How many nights you came home late without explanation, or didn't come home at all, and I just accepted it. Accepted being treated like I was lucky you stuck around. She flinched at that. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. His voice was gentle now, almost sad. And the worst part is, I let it be like that. I enabled it by never drawing a line, never saying enough. So in a way, I'm responsible too. But not anymore. She sank down onto the porch step, still clutching the papers, her expensive bag falling beside her with a soft thud. He'd never seen her like this before, completely undone, stripped of the polished confidence she wore like armor. Part of him wanted to comfort her out of habit. years of conditioning making him reach for empathy. But he kept his hand on the door, kept his distance. He'd learned that lesson too well. I was with him, she said suddenly, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. With Ben. From my gym. The confirmation hit differently than he expected. Not with the sharp pain of betrayal, but with the dull ache of validation. He'd suspected, of course. The late nights, the password-changed phone, the defensive reactions to simple questions. But suspecting and knowing were different countries, and he'd just crossed the border. The whole 5 days, he asked. She nodded, not looking at him. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. He asked me to leave you. To choose. And I thought about it. Really thought about it. She laughed, a broken sound. At the beach house, with him, it felt so easy. So simple. No history, no resentments, no disappointed looks when I came home late. Just fun and possibility, Anne. And you came back anyway, he finished. Why? She finally looked up at him, mascara streaked and raw. Because he's not you. Because what we had was. I don't know, it was exciting but empty. And I realized that what we had, that's real. That's valuable. Even if I've been terrible at showing it. He absorbed this, leaning against the doorframe. 7 years, and it came down to this. She'd auditioned his replacement and found him wanting. He should feel vindicated, victorious even. Instead, he just felt tired. So I was the safe choice, he said. The backup plan when the exciting option didn't work out. No, that's not, she stood abruptly. You're twisting it. I'm trying to be honest with you. I made a mistake. I know that now. But I'm here, choosing you, choosing us. Doesn't that count for something? A week ago, maybe it would have. He met her eyes steadily. But you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. Every day for 6 months, you chose to betray me. Every lie, every late night, every time you looked me in the eye and let me believe we were okay. Those were all choices. And the past 7 years. Her voice rose, desperate now. Do those choices not matter? Every good day, every moment we built together? You're just throwing all of that away. No, he said quietly. You did. You threw it away when you decided whatever you were getting from him was worth more than what we had. I'm just acknowledging the truth. She moved toward him, reaching for his hand, but he stepped back. The hurt that flashed across her face was genuine. He could see that, but he couldn't let it matter. Not anymore. I love you, she said, and maybe it was even true in her way. I know I've been selfish, I know I've hurt you, but I love you. We can fix this. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Just don't give up on us. I'm not giving up, he said. I fought for this marriage every single day while you were checking out. I fought when you stopped coming to bed at the same time. I fought when you stopped asking about my day. I fought when you stopped looking at me like I mattered. I've been fighting alone for so long that I'm exhausted. Then let me fight now. She was crying harder now, her voice breaking. Let me show you that I can change, that I want to change. Please. Please don't do this. He wanted to believe her. God, some part of him still wanted to believe that they could salvage this, that love could conquer not just this betrayal but the hundreds of small ones that had preceded it. But he'd read enough, learned enough in his late-night research sessions to know that change required more than promises made in desperation. It required genuine remorse, sustained effort, and time. And he didn't trust her with any of those things anymore. Tell me something, he said. If Ben had said yes, if he'd been everything you hoped for, would you be standing on this porch right now? Her silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, he continued. You're not here because you chose me. You're here because he didn't choose you. And I deserve better than being someone's consolation prize. That's not fair, she protested weakly. Maybe not, he agreed. But it's true. And the saddest part is, I think you actually believe you're doing me a favor by coming back. That I should be grateful you picked me after all. That's how little you think of me, of what I bring to this marriage. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time, he saw something like understanding dawn in her eyes, a recognition of the damage she'd done, not just with the affair but with the 1,000 cuts that had come before it. "What do I do now?" she asked, small and lost. "You read those papers. You call the lawyer. You figure out your next steps." He straightened, preparing to close the door. "Your things will be safe in the garage for the next 30 days. After that, I'll need you to arrange storage. And us." Her voice was barely a whisper. "There is no us anymore," he said gently. "There hasn't been for a while. We were just both too afraid to admit it." The house felt different in the morning light. Quieter, maybe, but also somehow more honest. He'd spent the night on the couch despite the empty bed upstairs, unable to sleep in the space they'd shared, running through the previous evening's confrontation in his mind like a film on repeat. Around 3 a.m., he'd heard her car finally start and drive away. Through the window, he'd watched her load the first few boxes from the garage, her movements jerky and angry. The sight had stirred something in him, not regret, exactly, but a bone-deep sadness for what they'd lost long before last night. For the couple they'd been once, the people who'd stood at an altar and genuinely believed in forever. Now, coffee in hand, he stood in the kitchen and felt the weight of his new reality settling onto his shoulders. His phone had been buzzing all morning. Her mother had called 3 times, leaving increasingly angry voicemails about what an ungrateful, cruel man he was. Her father, more measured, had sent a single text, "Let's talk before you do anything you'll regret." Jennifer had messaged too, surprisingly sympathetic. "She told me everything. I'm sorry. You deserve better." He'd responded only to his lawyer, confirming the events of the previous night and discussing next steps. The divorce would take months to finalize, but the emotional work was done. That was the strange thing about endings. Sometimes they happened all at once, and sometimes they happened so gradually you didn't notice until you were standing in the ruins. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his own mother, and he answered. "I heard," she said without preamble. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Ask me in a few months. Your father wants to know if you need help with anything. Legal stuff, moving, whatever." He smiled despite everything. His parents had never warmed to his wife, though they'd hidden it well out of respect for his choice. His mother had once commented, after too much wine at a holiday dinner, that his wife wore her beauty like a weapon. He'd been offended then. Now he understood. "I'm okay, Mum." "Really? You know what I'm proud of," she said softly. "That you knew your worth. That you didn't let fear or history make you accept less than you deserve. That takes courage." After they hung up, he walked through the house room by room, seeing it with fresh eyes. The living room where they'd hosted friends who slowly stopped coming around. The dining room where dinners had become silent, tense affairs. The study where he'd spent more and more time, retreating into work rather than facing the truth of their failing marriage. The bedroom where intimacy had become another chore, another thing she tolerated rather than desired. He'd have to redecorate, he realized. Not because he couldn't stand the memories, though some of them stung, but because he needed to reclaim these spaces. Make them his own rather than shrines to what had been. Around noon, David called. "She's hired an attorney. Fletcher from Morrison and Associates. He's good, but he's also realistic. They'll push back on the abandonment claim, argue it was a temporary separation, that kind of thing." "Let them argue," he said calmly. "I have the police report, the bank records, the timeline documented. And I have something else." "What's that?" "Her confession. She admitted to the affair last night, told me it had been going on for 6 months. I recorded it." He'd turned on his phone's voice memo app before opening the door, some instinct telling him to document everything. "Is that admissible? In this state? For a divorce proceeding?" "Absolutely." David sounded impressed. "You're thinking clearly." "I'm thinking like someone who's tired of being a victim," he corrected. The afternoon brought more visitors. His best friend Jake showed up with beer and takeout, not saying much but providing the kind of solid, uncomplicated presence that meant more than words. His younger sister called to offer her spare room if he needed space. His boss sent an email checking in, letting him know to take whatever time he needed. Each gesture of support reinforced what he'd been too blind to see during the marriage. He had people who cared about him, who valued him, who wouldn't disappear for 5 days and expect gratitude for returning. He'd been so focused on keeping his wife happy, on being enough for someone who was never satisfied, that he'd neglected the relationships that actually nourished him. As evening fell, he found himself back in the kitchen, the same spot where everything had ended just 24 hours ago. The coffee maker gurgled familiarly. The refrigerator hummed. Life, he realized, would continue. Days would pass. The wound would scab over, then scar, then fade to a dull ache he'd carry but not be crippled by. His phone lit up with a message. From her, "I never meant to hurt you. I hope someday you can forgive me." He read it twice, then set the phone down without responding. Forgiveness might come eventually. He wasn't interested in carrying anger forever. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It didn't mean forgetting. It just meant releasing the poison so it didn't consume him. He thought about the man he'd been 5 days ago, the one who would have waited forever for her to come back, who would have accepted any explanation, any excuse. That man was gone, and he didn't mourn him. That man had been half asleep, living a life that happened to him rather than one he chose. This new version, harder, maybe, but also clearer, knew his own worth. Knew that being alone was better than being with someone who made him feel alone. Tomorrow, he'd start the practical work, separating finances completely, meeting with his lawyer, beginning the process of legally dissolving what had been emotionally dead for far too long. But tonight, he poured himself a drink, put on music she'd always hated, and sat in the silence that was no longer empty but full of possibility. The ending of his marriage wasn't a tragedy. It was a liberation. He raised his glass to the empty room, to new beginnings, to the harder but more honest road ahead. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was his. And that, he discovered, was enough.